Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where we delve right into it, where we talk about what does it take for us to bring ourselves as teachers, as educators, those of us who work with children, what does it take for us to lead and develop tomorrow's leaders? And today is a special episode. We're going to talk about the contribution that anthropology can make to education. And because of that topic, I mean, who else was I going to ask? Dr. Monty Badami, please welcome him. Thank you very much, Monty, for coming on to my podcast today.
Hey, it's a real pleasure, Jo. What a pleasure.
And Monty's just amazing. So we're just going to step right into it because I have a feeling, you know, this podcast could go on for hours if I let it. So we're just going to start with Monty. Tell us a bit about what you're up to right now.
Look, I'm an anthropologist. I basically wherever there are humans, I'll be there, Jo. Essentially, I like to frame what anthropology is for a lot of people because I think one of the biggest challenges is that I take for granted what it is. I live and breathe it. But it seems like a lot of people have a vague idea of what it is, and only a very few people really know what it is. Yeah. So kind of as a way of giving you a bit of context, you know, essentially for me, anthropology is the study of humans, right? So from how we've evolved to be this kind of flawed physical species that we see before us to how this physical species has been able to, you know, migrate and spread to nearly every square inch of the earth. And not just how we've been able to get to all those different places and survive, but how we've been able to actually thrive in those different places. And the reason why we thrive in those places is not because we do the same thing, but because we actually have the capacity to do things differently and think about things differently. And so a big part of anthropology is understanding, you know, not just physical diversity or the evolution of physical diversity, but also the evolution of cultural, psychological, emotional, social, personal identity, diversity, correction. And so, you know, that's kind of the foundation of what I do. And whenever I'm working with people and dealing with people, it's all about really bringing about those essential qualities of our humanity to add value, but also to level up the impact of what we do and how we do it. And so, you know, that means, you know, how do we communicate, you know, when we are sensing and making sense of and experiencing the world? How do we sort of understand that through language and thought processes and through our bodies? How do we communicate that to ourselves and to other people in our group? How do we communicate that between groups who maybe speak different languages? How do we come up with new and innovative ways of dealing with the world when the world changes? So how do we decouple from old ways of doing things and open up to new things, or innovate around existing things so that we can adapt them to deal with the challenges that the world brings up? And so, you know, communication and resilience and innovation and adaptation and collaboration and you know, that critical thinking stuff, which we seem to think is all 21st century, for me, is actually the oldest thing that we have.
Yes.
For me, we've always lived in like in a volatile, unstable, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, and our ability to deal with that is our humanity. So ultimately, what I do is I help people connect with our humanity, which is, I believe, our superpower. And that superpower comes from not being perfect, but being human, by being imperfect, by being flawed and vulnerable. And that's why we need each other. And that's why we have communities and cultures. And that gives us this amazing creative capability to actually deal with stuff. So I take that and I go into schools and communities and businesses and help people connect with their humanity and just provide opportunities for them to be real and to be connected. And to be completely honest, the magic kind of comes from them.
What I love about your work, Monty, and the way you express it, so if anyone wants to look up more of Monty's work, he has a business called Fatherson, and that's on Facebook and LinkedIn and all of the things. But one of the things I like about how you talk about it is that you bring a concept like anthropology, which I think, apart from you, I mean, I'm sure there are others, but, you know, it's very kind of a university-based, or when we talk about philosophy or sociology, or, you know, we're very bad at it, most of us, at kind of bringing that to actual reality. You know, what does that look like in the court of life? And love that you don't shy away from the fact that you are bringing in that world of anthropology and all the thinking that comes from that, and all the research and the theory, and bringing that, to schools and communities, as you say. So tell us, what does that look like on the core? So when you do that, what does that actually mean? What do you do?
What does that actually mean? How do I bring anthropology into the world? It's an interesting one, because anthropology is a unique subject.
Yeah.
The thing about anthropology is it cannot be learned from a book. It cannot be learned from the confines of a university. That's why, as anthropologists, doing my PhD, I spent 18 months in the field with an Indigenous community, understanding their culture, and that's the beauty of anthropology, is that, the stuff that is in our books and in our universities comes from real life. Yeah. And so it's a funny question, because from my perspective, all I'm doing is taking the perspective of anthropology to help us kind of pay attention to what's happening in our real life.
Yeah.
One of the things about anthropology, or one of the things about culture, is that the norms become so embedded in our bodies that we take them for granted and assume that they are natural and that there's no other way of doing things. And this is where anthropology brings us a disposition and a lens through which to see the world. And that lens just basically enables us to go, well, you know what? All that stuff that we think is normal, all that stuff that we take for granted, whether it be gender or race or class or how we dress or how we eat or how we, prepare ourselves in the morning in the bathroom, whatever, that all those things have changed over time, and they're different from place to place. So they don't have to be that way. And having that kind of that questioning about the norms and the expectations of society gives us an opportunity to just see things from a different perspective. And that perspective taking is kind of the foundation of this reframing process that enables us to see that the problems that we have, or the challenges that we have, we can come to it from many different angles. And so that's what I bring, that's what anthropology looks like in the real world, is being able to see things from different angles, stepping back to see the bigger picture, and drawing the dots, connecting the dots so that we can see how things are related, how things are connected, and by helping people to do that in a safe way, we get away from this idea that there's like a linear way of dealing with our problems, that there's a cause and effect thing, that if I do this one thing, everything will change. Rather, we use that perspective to help people embrace the complexity of human experience and to draw in our resources, which are our relationships and our experiences and the things in the world, to help us process our challenges and actually come up with solutions. And I know that's not a specific answer for you.
It's all right, I'll ask it.
This is my big marketing problem. How do you explain anthropology? Well, you don't.
You can't.
You can't. You just, because you shouldn't have to. I think. That's probably a bit rhetorical. I think more to the point. I think people only really understand it when they experience it, because what we do is we create a space that is so psychologically and emotionally safe. And we give people an opportunity to kind of engage in activities or story sharing or creative processes that provide a really powerful metaphor to reflect on their lives and their relationships. And then we hold that space so that they can articulate that to the people around them. I was going to say, from an educational perspective, I suppose we would employ a combination of experiential learning, so that highly reflective process, and Mesereau's transformative learning, I suppose, from an ed psych perspective. So this idea that, we have these experiences or disorienting dilemmas, and we kind of go, oh, I'm the only one who's feeling like this, and then you actually talk to someone about it and you realise you're not alone, and through that process you all start making meaning together, and you decouple yourself from the assumptions of a problem, and you start to actually put it together in a way that allows you to move forward. And we combine that with processes around which people can actually identify their issues, identify their resources, look at the areas they need to deal with, and create a plan to move forward.
So one of the ways you do that is through camps, and talking about it, because Monty did one recently that my husband and son went on and was transformative for them. So tell me how all those amazing things that you're talking about live in something like a father-son camp. What is it that you do, and give us some examples of some transformations that you've seen in father-son relationships on those camps.
Well, Jo, you're speaking to an anthropologist, right? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, how was James and Spence before the camp, And how were they when they came home?
Well, they have a good relationship. You know, James is a really involved father and very much, yeah. But Spence has a few challenges and is, I think, any father and son, and they look alike, right? They look alike and they act the same. So inevitably, when you're living with yourself, you can kind of come up against each other. And I think they both wanted that opportunity just to be with each other without, you know, me around and without the kids around. But it was actually really difficult for Spencer to go. You know? He likes being at home. He likes his creature comforts. He likes his cats and things, but also he loves other kids. And he loves being outdoors. So we knew as parents that he was going to love it. He just didn't know that. It was a bit of a challenge getting them in the car or getting him in the car. And there wasn't any like happy waving or anything. But when they came home, it was like just bright. Both of them were just bright. Like they must have been exhausted, but you couldn't see it in their face. It was just, you know, just so happy. They had this father-son handshake that they wanted to show us, and then they showed his youngest son the handshake, so now he knows it, so now it's like this boys' handshake that they have. Spencer couldn't stop talking about the other dads, and that's what I love too. He talked about the men as well as the kids and how awesome they were, and it was like, yeah, I don't know what the word is, but there was, you know, it was like a kind of bond. You know, you could kind of see the bond had come even closer than what it was, but there was an ease to it.
Yeah, right. And you've hit the nail on the head. I love it. I love that explanation and that description. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm getting quite emotional. I'm reminiscing on the weekend. It's a highly emotional experience. Yeah. And I want to be really clear is that you know, when we in the education space, we talk about soft skills and resilience and emotional intelligence. We always talk about them as these sort of ancillary things that we have to do. And I understand the administrative and the time pressures and all the pressures in education, you know, and I know that the goalposts are always changing and we're always dumping another bloody thing. Story-based learning, individual learning plans, visual thinking, bloody mindfulness, right? Like, I was going to swear. It's another bloody thing. And the problem is that there's no investment. Because it's just more stuff being loaded onto teachers who are also then being are not sort of being trusted to be human sensing, processing beings to actually understand their kids. They're now administrators and report writers, right?
Oh, so true.
We can have
it's so conceptual. Like what's resilient? Even today, I actually had a conversation with my students, and I was saying, well, what's present in, you know, how do we do improvisation? We were talking about how do we do improvisation? Creativity. It's like, what's that? What is? Tell me, what is it? Resilience. What's that? What is it?
That's right. So we take this stuff, which is not only vague and ambiguous, but also actually creates a lot of resistance for teachers.
Yes.
For example, and actually also creates a lot of resistance for most adults because that's the crap that they're being told to deal with in their performance reviews and their 360 reviews, right? Whereas we take this stuff, you know, you were talking about, as you were trying to describe that connection and that bond, you were using your hands, you were visualizing with your body. And so and when you're in that space, it is palpable. You can actually feel and see it, right? Yeah. And this is the material that anthropologists work with. The unspoken, the invisible, but the experiential. Yeah. You know, this is how we're trained to interpret what's happening in the world, process, analyze, synthesize, and then report back. So that's what we do all the time. And so we take these kinds of, these aspects of human connection. And this is the thing, community and human connection actually does stuff from an evolutionary perspective. We you know, and when we break away from this Cartesian myth of mind versus body and acknowledge that embodiment and mind are kind of the same thing. And there are plenty of, you know, philosophical and also neurological studies that help to justify and support this. Unfortunately, popular culture hasn't quite caught up. You know it in the performative space, right? In the performance space, we know it, we understand it, and there's lots of theories around it. Yeah. It's very difficult to communicate those theories, and so that's why I tend not to try to communicate the theories. And I'd love to share a metaphor on how, you know, performance and improvisation work with regards to human agency.
Yeah.
But the idea is that we take that anthropological understanding of bodies, brains, behaviors, of neurological processes, of genetic processes, of social processes. We work with human experiences. We look at symbols, structures and practices. We look at societies, cultures and people. We look
how does that look in terms of activities though, Monty? So, like, you know, let's paint the picture. You're turning up on these camps, the Fatherson, what happens next?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is,
what do they do?
So what that means is that we put a lot of time in the design.
Yeah, right.
So we put a lot of design in the time, and we put a lot of design in the setup of how we're going to engage with those participants.
Right.
And so, you know, that design's really important. And what happens if they come there, and we know that on the first day, our goal is to just create connection and have fun.
Yeah.
And the way that we connect is we use stories and we play games. You know, the motto of Habitus is we connect through stories and we learn through play. You know, truth telling and listening is and yarning, all these sort of deep enculturated processes use playfulness. Playfulness and improvisation is such an important aspect of social change. For example, questioning the norms of society, right? And actually shining a light on them so that we can do something with them. Or storytelling connects us because we have to be empathetic to understand what the storyteller is telling us. It fires off those parts in the occipital lobe. It stimulates the white matter. It really stimulates the frontal cortex, right? So all these brain things that are happening, which are invisible, but we know happen, actually create bonds. You know, in providing challenging experiences, and this is what, you know, Hattie would talk about with visible thinking, or Mizero would talk about in his transformative learning, by creating that kind of an aspect of challenge, but scaffolding it so that it isn't unsafe or traumatic or anxiety causing.
Yeah.
And we say we want them to be cooked but not burnt, right? So that there is transformation. By applying a bit of pressure and a bit of challenge, what happens is that people have to make sense of that internal sort of chaos or disorder, right? And it creates what's known as a cognitive dissonance, that people then go, well, how do I make sense of it? And when you're in a group setting, you tend to make sense of it together, and that actually creates greater social bonds. So, I mean, if I was to say we tell stories and we play games, like, what would that say, right? But the fact that we understand how the task of storytelling and how the task of game playing actually creates bonds, we harness that, and we sort of sequence those events in a particular order so that we're building towards our end state. And the end state on day one, I don't want to give the game away, but the end state really of day one is for everybody to be singing and making stuff up around a fire. Telling story, like literally, where we're kind of invisible and the participants are driving that creative improvisational process.
I heard all about the song, Monty, and they're still singing it at home. And I mean, I think that's when James's face was lighting up the most. And I know it wasn't, he's a musician, but it was more than that. It was that he had been a part of creating this original piece of music with 5 other dads he'd never met before, a bunch of kids, and who were all playing and all had their own contribution to that music. Like, you know, he lit up, and they're still singing the song.
And look, the song came from a joke that your son told earlier in the day, right? So it's like that. So this is the idea that the community creates these opportunities to build on cultural words, or you build a culture through the language and the experiences you share together. And it's the same thing in the classroom. We create a culture of inquiry, a culture of learning in the classroom, and we get that investment from the kids by recognizing that the things that they share, they may be off the curriculum, but they contribute to the culture of the classroom. We can harness that to then use words or languages or create objects in the classroom that help people feel connected to that space, and feel that that space is something that they have created. And so those, like, this is why it comes back to all that anthropological stuff, because we're looking at how communities are forged and how communities have been essential for us in processing complex experiences, but also coming up with new and innovative ways of dealing with life's challenges. And that's freaking learning.
Yeah. And we throw it away, that word, I think, sometimes, community. You know, we talk about the school community or the classroom community.
Ticking the box is what it becomes.
Yeah, and without actually realising how what a complex process it is to create a community of cohesion, connection.
I would argue it's actually quite simple.
But we don't give the space to it, right?
No, we don't. We don't empower the teachers. We don't value the students' diversity. We don't value the teachers' diversity. I mean, let's be honest, Jo, you know, the system of education is broken, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's outdated, it's broken. It's not made for you know, the reason why 21st century learning principles, you know, all these things that we're talking about that are relevant to the VUCA world, the reason why they're coming back is because we have chosen to ignore them for a while. Not a long while in the context of human history, but a long enough time for us to think that creativity, improvisation, flexibility, like humble inquiry, you know, playfulness, storytelling are actually new and wonderful things.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah. You only have to be a parent, right, to see how early play emerges in us. I was really surprised when I first became a parent how early I saw, you know, Spencer start playing and, you know, playing and trying to make sense of his world through that. It's so early on, and we, you know, spend our whole education career, you know, trying to squash it out of them.
That's right. And look, and this is the thing
that the workplace, and now we want it again.
I know. And so this is the reason why I started doing what I was doing. I was teaching at university for 13 years, I think. And I was just amazed at how young people were not taught those skills of critical thinking. And I freaking love the big ideas and playing with the ideas as a form of material, right? And I'd go to these lectures and I'd be like, wow, the whole tertiary system had changed from being this amazing place when I started many moons ago, as a place of ideas and knowledge and wisdom and creativity and resistance and subversion and all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
To a place where there's no graffiti anywhere.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it's become a client model. And education itself, primary education and secondary education has as well. Because of the importance we place on metrics and the assumption that those metrics actually feed into success.
Yeah.
Now, I do a lot of work on suicide as well, youth suicide. I did that work in my PhD with Indigenous communities, and now as well, looking at how these metrics and this culture, these norms create the kind of pressure that actually they're killing our kids, you know. They're killing adults as well, and it's because, you know, we're compromising so much for this ideal or this dream that doesn't satisfy us. It doesn't leave us fulfilled. It's not incredibly meaningful for a lot of people, right? And so, you know, I would go to university and I'd teach these kids, and I hated the fact that I'd worked so hard to get to this position where I was engaged in a client-based relationship where the kids paid their money at university, and what they wanted their product, and their product was not the knowledge or the learning or the wisdom or the skills. It was the piece of paper, and they didn't care how they got the piece of paper. They didn't care what piece of paper they got. And so I was accountable to that transactional relationship. There was nothing transformative about it. So I said, bugger it, I'm going to have a go and see where else I can play. And I, you know, with one foot in the academic field, I sort of went to the schools and thought, maybe I've got to start in the high schools. I was in there and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I was getting traction, but they were always chucking me in with those problem kids, the kids that nobody wanted to teach. And we would have these profound transformations with them, right? Basically because we'd give them the opportunity to take off their masks and allow themselves to be seen for who they are, not for how everybody else labelled them. And they were amazing, amazingly creative, amazingly respectful and empathetic and complex, but not given the opportunity to be themselves because they were always judged because they were never good enough to be like everybody else. The truth is, I look at those kids and I imagine they will be much more successful than the majority of people that I was dealing with who are well within those normative streams, right?
Yeah.
Because they had all the creativity and innovation was knocked out of them. And so, you know, and so I was like, well, maybe I've got to start early. I've got to start in primary school. So I went to the primary schools and I was teaching in primary schools, you know, as a school mentor and running their resilience and emotional intelligence and relationships programs, using music, martial arts, performance, drama, storytelling, creative activities to really draw that stuff out, and also a connection to nature. And it was working. But the system was broken and it didn't enable us to actually, and the teachers were overworked and busted. And I would teach pre-service teachers who would leave their degree with a light in their eyes, and I'd see them out working, and that light would slowly be beaten out of them, to the point where these amazing people who we send out and who have this ability to make a difference are sort of shackled and limited by the bureaucracy and the administration, and just broader sort of social, political and economic pressures that shape the way that we teach our kids. Now, my thing is that, you know, when we, and I get this question all the time with regards to individual learning plans, for example, and my big thing is, if you meet the kids where they are, if you actually engage with them as human beings, if you generate that investment from them by coming from a place of respect and taking the time to connect with them, then those reflective practices and that sort of critical thinking process will naturally ignite on its own. And I guarantee you, they will take your learning programs or your learning outlines in a direction you never thought was possible, which means you're exceeding the expectations of that learning experience. So, you know, it actually means that if you can be much more, if you can embrace the complexity of a diverse classroom, if you can make it inclusive so people feel emotionally and psychologically safe to contribute, then individual lesson plans is as complex as knowing your students and knowing yourself, right? And if you can do that, then you can actually facilitate that community of inquiry and that community of support and community of advice and creativity by just understanding your kids and giving them the opportunity to be human and be themselves, and they create the gold.
And there's some level, though, as well, of having kind of, you know, to be very in touch with who you are as a teacher as well, because the other thing with individual learning plans that I think misses the point is that it's all about the student in a vacuum. Like some of them are designed as, you know, the student, you know, that's for that student. And no matter where the student is, the plan works, which is not in reality, you know, it's depending on who's the teacher, who else is in the classroom. You know, it denies the you know, psychological fact, the neurological fact that we learn as, you know, together. We don't learn.
We learn in a relational context. We learn in a relational context. We learn alone and we learn together, but we're never ever fully alone, because our experience has always involved others. And I think this is really important, because this is like Gonski took like an amazing thing and then got turned into bloody Napland, right? Same thing with individualized learning plans. Takes this really important thing of going, you know, students are individual. We can't just have a cookie cutter model and then put it into another mechanism through which we are labeling students and kind of limiting students. You know, ignoring what's in their virtual school bags, ignoring all these other experiences and resources and knowledge and things that they bring to actually make the classroom better. Rather than seeing them as a disruption to the work. I mean, there's a reason for our work, and rather than seeing them as diverting from our curriculum, we can actually see, well, let's push the curriculum further. And this is the stuff that, you know, I'm doing with your sister Kate with regards to the Indigenous education stuff. It's not just about how do we make those Indigenous kids learn more like us, or how do we teach, you know, people who've never met an Indigenous person, how do we teach them to bloody, you know, to do dot paintings and tell a story about a snake? It's not about that at all. It's about how do we actually draw upon the wealth of experience of the individuals in our classroom to actually change the way we think and contribute to the classroom and change the way that we teach. And that's the same principle when we're creating a community of inquiry in the classroom, a culture of learning in the classroom, you know, holding that complexity, you know, seeing that complexity, challenging the perspectives, seeing things from different perspectives, taking a step back and joining the dots. And that's what I said before is kind of that anthropological perspective, anthropological method, which for me is not something is not something that we have learned because an anthropologist said so. We've learned because we've done a PhD. It's something we've learned because we've watched and observed and learned from people. That's a human thing, not an anthropology thing. Totally.
And I think, like, sometimes I say to my students, you know, I say to my students, all the students in your class are perfect. You don't have to fix them.
That's right.
You know, you don't have to fix the students. The students are fine. We're just creating a context, we're creating a community, we're creating a connection where we're all going to learn something new together.
Absolutely.
In their eyes when they go, what do you mean I don't have to fix them? Because I think a lot of, you know, very well-intentioned students and teachers are there to kind of, you know, give opportunities to people who've never had them before without kind of going, well, what about you? You know, what can you learn from, you know, you don't have to fix anyone, but how can we transform our learning together?
Yeah, and look, and this is when you say that this idea of knowing yourself is so important. When we do that, when we do the emotional intelligence stuff, right? It's all about, well, you have to have insight into yourself.
Yeah.
You actually can't know how anybody else feels.
That's right.
Empathy is not actually you knowing what other people feel. It's about you projecting based upon your experience of your own internal, emotional, psychological complexity, and being able to see that that person in front of you is not monochromatic. They aren't just the thing that you see, not the mask that they wear, that there's so much more behind the surface layer, right? And this is Irving Goffman. He's a great American sociologist. He talked about dramaturgy, which I reckon you'd love. Have you heard much about dramaturgy?
Oh, a little bit. If you kind of sparked a little memory in my head.
Yeah. So Irving Goffman, he talked about dramaturgy. He looked at the performance of self in public places, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he says, you know, that we all wear these like a stage. We all have a front of house and a back of house, right? Yeah. The front of house is lovely and pristine, and it, you know, it's the show, and the back of house is messy as the proverbial, right? And everybody's back of house is crazy as. Yeah. And he said that, you know, like we have that lovely veneer, that facade, which looks perfect, and the people see and they love and they consume it, and it's wonderful. But if you see behind the curtains, you can actually see that messiness behind it, and we all have that messiness. Yeah. Now we can relate this to Reckhart's work on masks, for example. This idea that, you know, we wear these masks in society as a performance of ourselves. I might wear the mask of masculinity, or the mask of parenthood, or the mask of doctor, or whatever. And when we go out into the world, other people wear these masks, and we will learn how to engage with each other on the basis of what these masks or social symbols mean. Yes. Now, if we interact with each other in a way that kind of maintains the integrity of these facades or masks, then we reproduce the status quo. And people are just being conditioned to actually continue existing in accordance with those norms, right? But sometimes we get the rare opportunity to actually see the cracks and the fissures in the mask, or peer through the cracks in the curtain. And some of the light of that complexity comes out quite naturally. And that's actually where those interactions have the opportunity to go in new and innovative ways. I relate this, Jo, and I promised I'd talk to you about this. I relate this to the concepts of performance. You know, in anthropology, we look at, you know, this age-old relationship between the structure and the agent. Are we created by society, or is society created by us, right? I mean, to some, that's a false dichotomy. And to others, it's like, well, maybe we can look at how that happens. You know, Marx talked about it a lot, and Foucault talked about it a lot. Said Foucault, who was a practice theorist, said we inculcate social structures into our body by constant repetition. You know, the example here might be, you know, music. You know, James would love this. You know, we practice our patterns and our drills, and we make those patterns part of our muscle memory. They become part of our body, right? Language, another example. The way that we move as a man or a woman in the world. I don't learn how to walk like a man because it's somehow biologically innate. The evidence doesn't support that. I learned that by watching others and practicing what they do. This is the performance of gender, right? And so same with music. We learn our scales, we learn our drills, our rhythm patterns. We make them part of our muscle memory. But when we get into that performative space where we're interacting with other performers, and not just interacting with performers, but interacting with the audience as well, the integrity of those scales and structures is not as important as the communication we have between us. And more often than not, it's when we make mistakes, when we go off track a little bit, that we have to actually work to bring it back on track. And in working to bring it back on track, we have the essence of improvisation and cultural creativity. And it's when we make those mistakes, or when we insert our humanity and our diversity and our difference into that performance, that performance, that song, that soliloquy, that show can go in those new and innovative directions. And I suppose what I'm saying is that in life we can train people to adopt these masks,
Yeah.
And we do all the time.
Mm.
We can train people to fit into those boxes, and we do all the time. But the real beauty, and we have to learn appropriate behavior, of course we do, right? But the real beauty, I think, of unlocking our humanity in the context of that is to help people see that that's not the only way. It's not the only way it has to be. And our dads walk away from the camps going, wow, there's a different way of being a person. There's a different way of being a parent. There's a different way of being a man. And I never thought of that before. And that's all we do. We make them feel safe so that they can question and reflect and actually make a choice for themselves.
And that's the biggest thing, like choice. I've been really, taking them on big time the last couple of years about, how I choose to be and realizing how much choice I do have. And it is quite powerful. It can be quite scary at first, but when you can embrace it and you see that, what it can bring to you, when you realize what you're choosing in your life and the patterns that you can actually break if you have the courage to do so, a whole new world opens up.
I think it's also important. I think ethically, I have to situate this aspect of agency and choice and say that we can't ignore the social, 100%. The economic, the gender, the cultural disparities in society. And this is the notion of habitus: is that we do all have a choice, but some of us have to choose more and choose harder and choose longer to get to the same place as others, right?
Some choices are easier than others
for some people, right? And so it's important to contextualize that. But yes, this aspect of choice is such an important part of it. It is very scary. We nearly lost one of the participants on Sunday morning because he was scared by the possibility that all these things that he had held to be true, that gives him a stability, right, aspects of his identity. And we're not trying to pull people's identity back. But his experience was that he was getting to a place where he was like, whoa, I'm really questioning this stuff. He was on the threshold, this precipice of change, and it was scary, and rightly so. He's like, I've got to go home to do a thing with some people, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, but just stay for the next thing, and we'll get you out at this time. And he did, and he came back and he said it was really inappropriate for me to ask to go because he had this amazing transformation. My life has changed. I said it wasn't inappropriate. You were just trying to look after yourself in the best way you knew how. And this is the thing, is that when we do these sort of change-making processes in the classroom, we need to understand the social, the political, the economic, and the cultural disparities, but we also need to apply that sort of trauma-informed framework, right? So this idea of they choose what they can do, because there's a reason why they are, we've got to meet them where they're at so that we don't traumatize them through that challenge. And so I look at this, I apply this saying, which is resistance is a window into a need not being met, right? In the classroom, when you see resistance, find the need and meet the need. And it's the same thing with myself. When I have resistance, it gives me an opportunity to get curious, not furious, and inquire. And sometimes I'm tired and I can't go there, and that's okay. Maybe I'm not ready. And so that sensitivity is a big part of the emotional intelligence training, which is required for this work, and which is why that knowing yourself is so important in knowing others and being able to manage that interaction to get the most out of it, so you're not just reproducing those sort of scripts, those performative scripts of normative status quos. And
I just, what you were saying, I've definitely gone through period, like I would say grief, in some of my transformations over the last couple of years, where you really are letting go of part of yourself that you thought was innate. And I think, there's no point rushing through that.
No.
You have to kind of cry. Well, in my context, I cry for a couple of days and you grieve it, and then you're ready to kind of take on that next. And in a way, that's what that dad needed to do, was probably grieve a bit of, a part of himself that he thought was innate or real.
And that's why we provide loads of sort of follow-up support for them. It's really important to be mindful of them. And we don't go to try and get that transformation. But
that's right,
But that's not what we promise. We don't go, you will change as a human. But it just happens because they've just got this amazing connection, and they can't help but be released and feel unlocked. And that's a wonderful thing. And grieving is really, really important. And I do a lot of masculinity work in like male-dominated areas like construction and in the army. And I can't expect people to just ignore or let go of an aspect of their identity that has defined them for so long.
Yeah.
All I can really do is honour their stories, their challenges, their vision for the future, and celebrate that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do in our camps. We just give people an opportunity to be seen. And this is one of the things that I mentioned to the dads, is that people don't want to be fixed or saved or cured. They want to be witnessed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so by creating that supportive environment, we just make it safe. We create the kind of conditions, and we give people the framework to just feel safe to be themselves. And truly, that's all you need.
Yeah.
You know, because then people, and this is the framework that I think people are trying to do with individual learning programs. Is what happens is people then take control of their own learning. They become responsible for their own learning.
Yeah.
And all we are doing is facilitating that.
Yeah, that's right. So in the classroom then, Monty, then just as a kind of last question, so I think, see how long, but because what I'm really conscious of is that you know, how do we start? You know, where do we start now? I mean, I'd love to smash the walls down, and I do think teachers need to be, you know, let that teaching mask go. But how does that, how can we do that in the current context?
Yeah, well, look, I want to smash the walls down too, but we've got to be careful of not letting the roof fall on top of us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I think that I come back to the anthropology thing. When I study evolution and adaptation, change is incremental, and it must be driven from within, and it cannot be delivered by some external force. It must be organically driven by the community of the classroom, and the community of the school, and the community around the school. And I believe that people want that change. What is challenging are the funding mechanisms, the political mechanisms and the administrative mechanisms that are actually limiting that, because in many aspects we're becoming much more risk averse around how education works, and what sort of constitutes success as a young person, as an adult. But what I do know is that when I have gone into schools, there's always one champion. And what I do is I'll go in, like we had an example, we had one champion, we went in, we did a program, he was like, oh my gosh, I need to get you back in here. We were then, on the basis of him, we were able to come in and do some stuff with the execs on the base, and they're like, oh my God, and we're like, on the basis of that, we're able to do something with the whole teaching staff, and they're like, oh my God. And the first thing they say is, well, how do we hold on to this? Because tomorrow it's going to be business as usual. I'm like, what we need to do is to support those people who've had that experience to come together, as I said before, as people who have ignited a passion, and who are then going to take responsibility for their own growth in that space, to go, well, how can we do this in a way that is relevant to our community? And just to try stuff out. You don't have to get it right. You just have to try lots of stuff, and something will land. You know, for some of them, it might have been, let's have a weekly check-in and we'll start developing that emotional intelligence. For another one, it's like, how do we enable our students to have those check-ins to feel connected? For another one, it was like, how do we start to actually learn to let go of the content and focus more on the relationships we develop through the delivery of the content, right? And that may mean that you will have like 5 teachers that are doing it, but just doing it with integrity, doing it with passion, doing it with consistency. Because as you know, with training, it's not about one big thing, it's about lots of little things.
Yes.
You know, it's about consistency over intensity.
Yeah.
So the more consistent it becomes, the more of an option it becomes to those other people who are resistant. And as I said before, they might be resistant because, well, they're not getting paid enough to come up with new ideas, or they've got stuff going on at home, and they can't afford the emotional or cognitive energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they've seen it before, and really what they need is not another flash in the pan, but a bit of trust that this is something that will stick.
Yeah.
You know, you work with teenagers, the first thing they want to do is try and push you apart to see if you're going to stay.
Yeah.
So why would that be different for anyone else? So what I say is, just start with something. Start small, and don't look for simple solutions to complex problems. Let go of this idea of having a linear causal understanding of problems, and acknowledging that they are complex, and that when we try to provide that simple solution to a complex problem, like Gonski, like individual lesson plans, we then have to spend I nearly swore again, a heap of time
undoing it all,
fixing it up, and then coming up with another simple solution. right? So embrace complexity, embrace your humanity. And I have these 3 golden rules for parenting and coaching and teaching and just being a good human. And that is, don't panic, don't take it personally, and don't be too hard on yourself. Because really, we're all just kind of faking it till we make it. We're all humans, which makes us sort of classic improvisers, right? And so, you know, but the beautiful thing is that because we're flawed and because we're all making it up as we go, you know, that doesn't make us failures, it makes us human, and that's why we need each other. And if we've got each other, then we have the resources we need to deal with any of life's wicked problems.
Well, that is an amazing point to stand it on, Monty. I could talk to you for hours. Maybe I'll just have to have you back on again. But, oh my gosh, thank you for the gift of you, and the community is just incredible and outstanding, and there's really a lot of good advice there for, you know, any teachers or students who want to make changes. It's just beautiful. Start small, bring in a network, and be okay to make some mistakes, I think, as well.
Big one.
Amazing. All right. Thank you, Monty. It's been another episode of Teaching Heroes, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Bye.